Okay, so you know how much we love diving deep, and today we have a really great one for you guys. Robert Greene's The Daily Laws, 366 Meditations.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, it's potent stuff.
It is, I mean, I'm a fan, as you know, of Robert Greene's work, and this is sort of like a nice distillation of a lot of the ideas that he's written about in his other books.
It's like a shortcut for everybody.
Yeah, it is a shortcut, yeah, to kind of get up to speed on a lot of the concepts that he's written about that deal with power and strategy and human nature and yeah, so this should be fun.
Yeah, I think that The Daily Laws is a fantastic way to get a crash course in Robert Greene's thinking, but also to kind of get these like daily nuggets of wisdom that you can actually apply in your life.
Right.
And so for anyone who's not familiar with him, he is the author of several really popular and really influential books, including The 48 Laws of Power,
Right.
Mastery,
Yeah.
The 33 Strategies of War, and The Laws of Human Nature. And so this book, The Daily Laws, I think it pulls from those other works, but it also includes some new material as well, including some thoughts that relate to his forthcoming book, The Law of the Sublime.
Right.
And it also, I think, incorporates some of his ideas from interviews and articles that he's written.
Yeah, and the format of the book is pretty interesting too, because it sort of follows the calendar year.
Exactly.
So there are 366 entries, one for each day of the year, and each month has a different theme. And the excerpts that we have today kind of span a number of these months, starting with January, which is about discovering your calling.
Right.
And then it goes into February, which is about the ideal apprenticeship. March is about the dimensional mind/creative active. And then it seems like there's a little bit of a hiccup with our source material because April's theme seems to actually be May's theme, which is the supposed non-players of power.
And then June and August both focus on being a master persuader.
Yeah.
July looks at the seductive character. September is about the grand strategist. October and November both examine the rational mind, and then we end in December with the sublime.
Yeah.
So we've got a pretty wide range of topics to cover.
We do. And so, as we always do, we're going to do our best to extract the most useful information, the most kind of aha moments.
Right.
And really like connect it back to you as the listener so you can, take something from this.
Absolutely.
Apply it to your own life and to sort of level up your own understanding of these different concepts.
Yeah, so we'll try to make this more than just a summary, right?
Oh, yeah.
We want this to be something that you can actually use. Yeah, exactly. And as we're going through this stuff, I mean, obviously these daily laws, they touch upon, lots of different ideas. But if we had to kind of boil it down to a few themes that we're going to be focusing on, it's really about, how to become more self-aware, how to achieve mastery in your chosen field, how to understand human nature, both the good and the bad, and how to, really connect with a sense of purpose.
Right.
So those are kind of like the big themes that we're going to be exploring.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it.
Yeah. And so let's get started with January.
Okay, let's do it.
So this is Discover Your Calling.
Right.
And Greene, right off the bat starts talking about how, our culture often gives us these sort of false notions about how to succeed in our careers and in life.
Right. Yeah. He points to some of these very common ideas that we've all kind of been exposed to. Things like, if you go to the right school, you'll automatically have a successful career, or if you have powerful connections, you'll be able to climb the ladder more easily. Yep. He talks about the idea that, you should avoid mistakes at all costs, and that you should never engage in any kind of conflict, and that you should always be moving as fast as possible, and that your work should always be fun and enjoyable. All of these kind of like myths that we've been taught.
Exactly. And so, I think what Greene does really well is that he juxtaposes those myths with the sort of harsher reality of the professional world.
Yeah, he points out that, there are a lot of people out there who have fragile egos, who are, very easily threatened and who may engage in pretty devious behavior.
Yeah.
He talks about the fact that, you may encounter a lot of indifference in the world from people who just don't really care about your success.
Right.
And that, you might even experience outright betrayal.
Yeah.
That people may stab you in the back or try to undermine you in some way.
And that there are all these like political games going on behind the scenes that nobody tells you about when you're like, trying to figure out what to do with your life.
Right.
And so I think that's a really important point that Greene makes, is that, don't just blindly follow these kind of, these cultural scripts about what success looks like,
Right.
you really need to kind of tune in and figure out what it is that you're actually passionate about.
Yeah, he talks about this idea of connecting to your own voice.
Yeah.
Finding that thing that really resonates with you and gives you purpose. And I think it's interesting that he kind of front loads the book with these ideas about finding your calling, because it sort of sets the stage for everything that comes after.
Exactly. And speaking of that calling, I think one of the most important points that Greene makes is that persistence and a desire to learn are more important than anything else.
Yeah.
Like more important than your education, more important than having money.
Yeah, he even says that, failures can be valuable learning experiences, that you shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how you actually learn and grow.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons why Greene is so credible is that he actually, went through this himself.
Right. He shares a story about being told that he wasn't writer material.
Right.
And this was, early in his life, and he was, trying to figure out what he wanted to do. And he got this feedback that he just wasn't cut out to be a writer. And so, he kind of went through this period of wandering where he tried out a lot of different jobs.
He had like 60 jobs or something.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, it was a lot of jobs.
Yeah, he worked in construction. He worked in journalism. He was a teacher. He was a waiter. He worked in the film industry.
Yeah, it was all over the place.
It was all over the place. But I think, what's so interesting about his story is that even though all of those experiences seemed unrelated at the time, they all kind of came together and helped him to become the writer that he is today.
Exactly. And so, he eventually pitched the 48 Laws of Power to Juice Delfers, who's this, publisher.
Yeah.
And he said that when he pitched it, it just felt so natural.
Yeah, like it was his destiny.
Yeah, it was like destiny. And then he talks about how, he just became so focused on writing that book that he was able to really like draw upon all of those experiences and put everything he had into it. And, obviously the book became a huge success.
Right.
But I think the lesson there is that, you may not know what your calling is right away.
Right.
But if you just keep exploring and trying new things and following your interests, eventually it'll all kind of click into place.
Yeah, I love that point. And it actually connects really nicely to one of the daily laws for January, which is January 7th, concentrate on maintaining a high sense of purpose, and the success will flow to you naturally. And so that idea of purpose, right?
Yeah.
Is so central to everything that Robert Greene writes about. And another example from January that I think really illustrates this is the January 8th entry, Occupy Your Own Niche. And he talks about V.S. Ramachandran, who's a neuroscientist. And Ramachandran as a child was fascinated by these unusual seashells called xenophora.
Interesting.
And these seashells are kind of unique because they collect other seashells and attach them to their own shells. So they're kind of like these collectors of other seashells.
That's cool.
Yeah, and Ramachandran was just really drawn to this as a child, and he studied them and he collected them, and he just couldn't get enough of them. And Greene points out that this early fascination with these unusual seashells actually led Ramachandran to his career path as a neuroscientist.
Wow.
Because he became interested in the brain and how it works and how it processes information, and he eventually ended up doing groundbreaking work on phantom limbs and other neurological disorders.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So the takeaway here is that, sometimes these kind of strange or quirky interests that we have as children can actually be clues to our calling.
Absolutely.
That they can point us in the direction of something that's really meaningful and unique to us.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to be something that, everybody else is doing, or that's considered to be, prestigious or whatever.
Right.
It's really about finding that thing that speaks to you.
That anomaly.
Yeah, that anomaly.
And speaking of anomalies, one of the other daily laws for January is embrace your weirdness.
Right.
Which I love that.
Yeah, that's a great one. And he quotes Coco Chanel there, who said, "The most courageous act is still to think for yourself aloud."
Yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, it's a great one. And Greene, talks about how, he embraced his own weirdness when he was designing the 48 Laws of Power.
Right.
He chose a very unconventional design for the book. It was very different from, what other books looked like at the time. And it actually made some people uncomfortable, but he stuck to his vision.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a huge part of the book's success.
Right. I mean, I think that's a really important point, too, is that, sometimes your weirdness is what's going to make you stand out.
Exactly.
And so it's important to not be afraid to be different.
Right.
To embrace those things that make you unique.
Yeah, and another important point that Greene makes in January is that the path is not linear.
Right.
It's not always going to be a straight line from point A to point B.
Right.
You may have to take some detours. You may have to make some course corrections.
Right.
But ultimately, the goal is to keep moving forward and to keep learning and to eventually find that niche that really sparks your interest.
Right. And to gain that control over your own destiny. And so the last daily law for January that we're going to talk about is trust the process.
Yeah.
And I love this one because it's so important, I think, in today's world where everything is so, instant gratification.
Right.
Greene really emphasizes the importance of patience and perseverance.
Yeah, he uses a great analogy of learning the piano.
Right.
He says, when you're first learning the piano, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Your fingers don't want to move the right way.
Right.
You're hitting the wrong keys. It's very frustrating.
You sound terrible.
Yeah, you sound terrible.
You're like, why am I even doing this?
Right.
Like, this is so hard.
Right. But he says, if you just stick with it and you keep practicing,
yeah,
you'll eventually reach a point where it becomes easier.
Right.
And then you'll reach a point where you can actually start to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then you'll reach a point where it becomes second nature to you.
Yeah, it's like you don't even have to think about it anymore.
Exactly.
You're just playing.
Right. And he says that that's true for anything in life.
Yeah.
Whether it's learning a new skill or starting a new business or whatever it is.
Right.
If you just trust the process and you're patient and you persevere, you'll eventually get there.
Absolutely.
So that's a great way to end January, right?
Yeah. Trust the process.
Trust the process.
And so let's move into February.
Okay.
Which is the ideal apprenticeship.
Yeah. And this is a really interesting concept because it kind of goes against what a lot of people think about, achieving success.
Right.
We live in a culture that's very focused on immediate results.
Yeah, like instant gratification.
Right.
Like, I want it now.
Exactly. But Greene is saying that, to really achieve mastery in anything, it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes patience. It takes a willingness to kind of put in the work and to learn from people who are more experienced than you.
Yeah, like that 5 to 10 year period.
Exactly. And he calls this the ideal apprenticeship. And he says that this is a phase that all masters go through.
Right.
Where they're not really focused on, getting ahead or achieving fame or fortune.
Right.
They're really focused on just learning and growing and developing their skills.
Right. And it's self-directed.
Exactly. It's self-directed and it's really about transforming yourself into the person that you need to be in order to achieve mastery.
Exactly. And so I think it's really important for listeners to kind of internalize this idea that, you're not going to be an expert overnight.
Right.
Like, it takes time to develop those skills, and it takes a willingness to kind of humble yourself and learn from people who know more than you do.
Yeah. And he even says that, you should have a youthful, adventurous spirit when you're going through this apprenticeship phase.
Right.
That you should be excited about learning new things and that you should seek out challenges.
Yeah.
And he says that the difficulty that you encounter is actually a measure of your progress.
Right. So, like, the harder it is, the more you're actually growing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a very different way of thinking about, success and achievement.
Right.
But I think it's a really important one, especially for people who are just starting out in their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greene, he illustrates this concept of the ideal apprenticeship with his own experience of learning French in Paris.
Right.
So, he studied French in school
for
many years. But he said that when he got to Paris, he realized that his French was woefully inadequate.
Yeah, he could barely understand anyone and he could barely speak.
Right. And so he basically had to immerse himself in the language.
Right.
And he talked about how, he would force himself to speak French every day, even though he was making mistakes constantly.
Right.
And he said that was really the key to his success in learning the language.
Yeah, he said it was like a sink or swim situation. He had to learn or he was going to drown.
Exactly.
And so, I think that's a really valuable lesson for for anyone who's trying to learn anything new,
Right.
is that you have to be willing to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to make mistakes.
Yeah, you have to be okay with looking like a fool.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
Exactly.
So, moving on to some of the other daily laws for February, there's one called the perfect mentor.
Right.
And I think this is such an important topic because, I think that we all need mentors in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Greene tells this great story about V.S. Ramachandran, who we talked about earlier.
Right.
Who, was really inspired by this book called Eye and Brain.
Yeah.
By a guy named Richard Gregory.
Uh-huh.
And so Ramachandran actually ended up reaching out to Richard Gregory.
Right.
And they formed this mentor-mentee relationship.
Yeah, and they had this instant rapport. They were both, very interested in the brain and how it worked, and they would do these experiments together. And Gregory was just a really inspiring and guiding figure for Ramachandran.
Yeah, and so, I think that story really illustrates the power of finding a mentor who's already achieved the things that you want to achieve.
Right.
Who can kind of give you guidance and support and help you to avoid some of the mistakes that they made along the way.
Yeah, and Greene talks about how a good mentor will instill confidence in you.
Right.
They'll teach you the ropes, they'll give you critical feedback,
yeah,
and they'll just kind of help you to grow and develop as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And another daily law for February that I thought was really interesting was absorb purposeful energy.
Right.
And he uses Coco Chanel as an example here again.
Yeah, he talks about her relationship with Arthur Boy Capel,
right,
who was a very successful businessman.
Right.
And Greene says that, Capel was really the one who taught Chanel about business.
Yeah.
And who gave her the confidence to start her own fashion house.
Yeah, he was like her rock.
Exactly. And Greene says that, it's important to find people like this in your life, people who have a lot of energy.
Right.
People who are purposeful, people who are going places.
Yeah.
And to kind of absorb their energy and let it rub off on you.
Yeah, and he makes a really good point, too, about how, sometimes it's helpful to seek out people who are in different fields than you are.
Right.
Because they can give you a different perspective.
Exactly.
And they can introduce you to new ideas.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's really valuable to have a diverse network of people.
Absolutely.
Who can kind of support you and help you to grow.
And another example from February that I think is really powerful is never enough knowledge.
Uh-huh.
And this one uses Napoleon Bonaparte as an example.
Okay.
And Greene talks about how, Napoleon was obsessed with military arts from a young age.
Yeah.
And he would read voraciously about military history and strategy, and he just couldn't get enough knowledge.
Yeah.
And Greene points out that this insatiable thirst for knowledge is what allowed Napoleon to rise through the ranks so quickly.
Yeah.
And to become one of the most successful military commanders in history.
Right. And he had that coup d'oeil.
Right.
That ability to see the battlefield.
Exactly.
In a way that other people couldn't.
And it all came from his intense self-directed apprenticeship.
Yep.
He put in the time, he put in the effort.
Yeah.
He really, mastered his craft, and that's what allowed him to achieve such great things.
Okay.
So, I think the lesson here is that knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And the more you know, the more successful you'll be.
Absolutely.
And another interesting daily law for February is establish your own style. And this one is about, not just following in the footsteps of others,
Right.
but creating your own unique way of doing things.
Right.
And Greene uses Louis XIV as an example here.
Okay.
He talks about how, Louis XIV created Versailles.
Right.
And he created all of these new rituals. And he really kind of broke away from the traditions of his predecessors.
Right.
And Greene says that, that's what made him such a powerful and influential figure.
Yeah.
Is that he created his own style.
Right.
He didn't just follow in the footsteps of others.
Yeah. And so what advice does he give to the listener about how to do that, how to establish your own style?
Well, he says that, you need to find ways to physically demonstrate your difference.
Okay.
It's not enough to just say that you're different.
Right.
You have to actually show it.
Right.
In your actions, in your work, in your appearance.
Yeah.
And he says that, you should avoid simply following in the footsteps of others. Don't just try to be the next so-and-so.
Yeah.
Try to be the first you.
Yeah, be original.
Exactly.
And so the last daily law for February that we're going to talk about is Greene's experience writing mastery.
Right.
And so, as we all know, Mastery is a very complex book.
Yeah, it is. It's a very dense book.
Yeah, it's like very intellectually challenging.
And it's very wide-ranging in scope.
Yeah.
It covers a lot of different topics, and it draws on a lot of different sources.
Right, and Greene talks about how, he really struggled with writing it at first.
Yeah, he said it was very slow going.
Yeah.
He would just kind of sit there and stare at the computer screen and nothing would come out.
Yeah.
But then he said that something kind of clicked.
Uh-huh.
And he started to write more intuitively and more quickly. And he said that it was almost like the book was writing itself.
Wow.
Yeah, and he describes it as this kind of fingertip feel. Like he could just kind of feel his way through the book. And he said that, it was like the book was living inside of him.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he emphasizes that, this level of creativity doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
It takes years of preparation, and it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes a real love for the work.
Yeah, and it goes back to that idea of the ideal apprenticeship.
Exactly.
Like you have to put in the time.
You have to put in the time.
You have to do the work.
Yeah.
And eventually you'll reach a point where, you can just kind of flow.
Right.
And the creativity will come naturally.
Right. And speaking of creativity, let's move into March.
Okay.
Which is the dimensional mind / creative active.
Right.
And this is really about how to become more creative.
Right.
And Greene's definition of creativity is a little bit different from what you might expect.
Okay.
He says that true creativity is not just about coming up with new ideas. It's about the openness and adaptability of our spirit. It's about being able to look at things from multiple angles.
Yeah.
And to reframe what we see.
Right.
So it's really about having a flexible mind.
Yeah.
And being open to new possibilities.
Right. And so one of the daily laws from March that I thought was really interesting was alter your perspective.
Right.
And so, we often get stuck in our own way of thinking about things.
Right.
And Greene is saying that, to be more creative, we need to be able to step outside of our own perspective.
Yeah, to kind of like shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, and to look at things from a different angle. And he uses this great analogy of, turning feathers into flying material.
Right.
Like, feathers are not inherently designed for flight.
Right.
But birds have found a way to use them for that purpose.
Exactly. And Greene says that, we can do the same thing with our ideas and our concepts. We can take something that's already existing and we can find a new way to use it.
Yeah, repurpose it.
Exactly.
For a different purpose.
And another daily law for March that I think is really helpful is pay attention to negative cues.
Okay.
And this is about, not just focusing on what's there, but also focusing on what's not there.
Right.
And he uses a couple of great examples here.
Okay.
He talks about Sherlock Holmes and the case of the dog that didn't bark.
Right.
And for those of you who are familiar with that story, the fact that the dog didn't bark was actually a clue.
Yeah, it was a key piece of information.
It was a key piece of information.
Yeah. And
Greene says that, we should be paying attention to those kinds of negative cues in our own lives.
Yeah.
What's not being said,
right.
What's not being done,
right.
What's missing.
Yeah.
And he also talks about Frederick Llewellyn Hopkins, who discovered vitamins. And he discovered vitamins by focusing on what was missing in cases of scurvy.
Interesting.
So he was, he was studying scurvy and he was trying to figure out, what was causing it. And he realized that, the people who were getting scurvy were lacking certain nutrients in their diet.
Right. And
so he started to experiment with giving them different foods.
Right.
And he eventually discovered that, if they ate certain foods, they wouldn't get scurvy.
Yeah.
And that's how he discovered vitamins.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So the takeaway here is that, sometimes the most important insights come from paying attention to what's not there.
Exactly.
So be on the lookout for those negative cues.
And March concludes with connect to your destiny.
Right.
On the 31st. And this is really about, following your passion.
Yeah, finding that thing that really lights you up.
Yeah, and Greene differentiates this from egotism and ambition.